Imagine a place where the walls still echo with screams that no one heard, where the air hangs heavy with the scent of decay and despair. These aren't just buildings. They're tombs for the forgotten, prisons disguised as sanctuaries. Welcome to Shadows of the Forgotten, where we dust off the yellowed pages of America's darkest archives, the creepiest hospitals and asylums that once held the broken minds of a nation. From the blood-stained halls of lobotomy labs to the overcrowded wards where thousands vanished into madness, we'll uncover their chilling histories, the dates they opened their gates to hell, and the scandals that slammed them shut forever. Tonight, we journey through 8 of the most haunted relics of psychiatric horror, places so cursed that even today, ghost hunters swear the shadows move on their own. But beware, these stories aren't just tales, they're warnings from the past. Lock your doors, dim the lights, and let's step into the abyss. If you hear a whisper behind you, it might not be the wind. So, let's begin our descent. Our first stop is a place where history and horror collide, deep in the heart of West Virginia. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, Weston, West Virginia. For more than a century, this massive stone fortress stood as both a sanctuary and a nightmare, its walls holding secrets that most folks would rather forget. Nestled in the fog-shrouded hills of West Virginia, the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum looms like a Gothic nightmare carved from the mountains themselves. Construction began in 1858, under the visionary Kirkbride Plan, a utopian blueprint for moral treatment, promising fresh air, sunlight, and compassionate care for up to 250 souls. It finally creaked open its iron gates in October 1864, amid the chaos of the Civil War, when Confederate raiders once stormed its unfinished halls in a daring gold heist that left blood on the fresh mortar. But paradise turned to purgatory fast. By 1880, it housed 717 patients, over 3 times capacity. The 1930s and 40s brought horrors that still chill the blood. The West Virginia Lobotomy Project, where doctors wielded ice picks like butcher's tools, slicing through brains in assembly line fashion, to cure everything from depression to defiance. Patients, including epileptics, alcoholics, and the non-educable, rotted in filth, chained to walls or left in ice baths for days. At its peak in the 1950s, 2,600 souls crammed its corridors, many buried in unmarked graves numbered like cattle. Whispers from the archives paint a gallery of ghosts. A little girl in a white dress tugging at visitors' sleeves, pleading for release. Shadowy figures in 19th century garb slamming doors at midnight, and blood-curdling screams echoing from empty wards where lobotomies once silenced them forever. One explorer swore he felt icy fingers trace his spine, whispering, "Let me out." The end came in May 1994, not from hauntings, but from a class action lawsuit exposing the overcrowding and abuse, plus the crumbling structure's refusal to yield to modern fixes. Deinstitutionalization, the 1960s shift to community care, sealed its fate as new drugs like Thorazine emptied the asylums nationwide. Today it's a National Historic Landmark, open for tours where the living tempt the dead, but at night, the shadows still clash. Waverly Hills Sanatorium, Louisville, Kentucky. High on a Louisville hillside, Waverly Hills Sanatorium stands as a sentinel of suffering, its 5-story brick hulk swallowing the horizon like a forgotten leviathan. Opened in 1910 as a 2-story wooden tuberculosis haven for 40 patients, it was a beacon of hope in the White Death's grip. TB killed 1 in 7 Americans back then. By 1912, with cases exploding, it expanded into the behemoth we dread today, designed to hold 400 but soon bursting at the seams. The archives overflow with agony experimental treatments like ultraviolet lights blasting lungs raw, surgeries ripping out ribs to collapse infected cavities, and heliotherapy, patients baked under lamps until their skin blistered. Children played in isolation wards while parents withered nearby. Over 6,000 souls perished here, their bodies slid down the infamous body chute. a 500-foot tunnel to hide the endless funerals from the living. Creepy tales slither from old nurses' logs. Orphan Mary, the little girl who haunts the third-floor room where she hanged herself, her laughter turning to sobs. Room 502, where two staffers leaped to their deaths in the 1930s, leaving blood stains that won't scrub away. And the chute itself, where shadows drag invisible weights, moaning for release. One investigator captured EVPs begging, "Help me breathe." Streptomycin's 1943 miracle cured TB, slashing patients by the 1950s. It shuttered as a sanatorium in 1961, briefly reopened as a nursing home, then closed for good in 1982, amid abuse allegations and decay. Now, a haunted attraction, Waverly lures the brave, but the dead don't perform for tickets. Pennhurst Asylum, Spring City, Pennsylvania. Nestled in Pennsylvania's rolling woods, we find the infamous Pennhurst State School and Hospital. Originally known as the Eastern Pennsylvania Institution for the Feeble-Minded and Epileptic, it began with a promise back in 1908, a self-sustaining haven for 400 imbeciles. But by the time it opened in 1908, it had already become a warehouse for society's rejects. Orphans, epileptics, the disabled, all crammed 10 to a bed in a sprawling maze of 26 buildings over 120 acres. The archives, they scream of barbarity. Children chained in cribs for years, naked adults herded like animals through halls smeared with filth, and electroshock therapies frying young brains without a whisper of consent. Geraldo Rivera's 1967 expose, it unveiled the hell within patients beaten, sterilized forcibly, left to die in the cold isolation. Thousands cycled through those doors. Few emerged whole. The ghostly yarns from old staff diaries, they chilled the deepest. The Tan Man, a hulking shadow throttling intruders. Children's apparitions giggling from barred windows, and slamming doors trapping explorers, as if the very walls remember the cages. One voice captured on tape chillingly whispers, "They're coming for you." A lawsuit in 1985 over dehumanization forced its closure in 1987. Deinstitutionalization and exposés like Willowbrook's ended that dark era. And now? Well, now it's a Halloween haunt. But let me tell you, Pennhurst spirits don't rest. They rage on. Danvers State Hospital, located in Danvers, Massachusetts. Perched on the cursed soil of the 1692 Salem witch hysteria, Danvers State Insane Hospital rose in 1878 as a Kirkbride palace for humane healing. Its sprawling wings opened their arms to 100 patients that year. But by the 1940s, 2,200 filled its bowels, overcrowded with the insane immigrants and war-traumatized veterans. The horrors unearthed in 1950s reports were chilling. Lobotomies in basement operating theaters, patients shackled for decades, and hydrotherapy drowning screams in icy water. Zelda Fitzgerald, she burned alive here in a 1948 kitchen fire, her jazz-age dreams reduced to mere ash. Unmarked graves dot the grounds, souls lost to treatments that broke more than they mended. Spectral sagas from Explorer logs tell of a nurse's ghost pushing wheelchairs down empty halls, bloodied figures from lobotomies shambling in shadows, and whispers chanting witch trial curses. Batman's Arkham Asylum? Yep. Inspired by Danvers' madness, budget cuts and deinstitutionalization closed it in 1992. Most of it was razed for apartments, but the hauntings persist in the Avalon Danvers complex. Lights flicker, doors lock on their own. The witch's ground claims its due, it seems. Rolling Hills Asylum, located in East Bethany, New York. Born in 1827 as the Genesee County Poor Farm, a brick refuge for paupers, drunks, and the so-called lunatic, Rolling Hills evolved into an orphanage, infirmary, and asylum by the 1950s, housing thousands over 130 years. Patients toiled in the fields as therapy, but abuse festered. Beatings for laziness, neglect claiming lives buried in a 500-grave potter's field. The archives are full of horrors. Roy Krause, the 10-foot shadow man who hanged himself, now hulks through rooms grabbing throats. Nurse Emmy, who slit her wrists in the morgue, her sobs echoing. And child spirits tugging at clothes, begging for play. EVP's cry, "Run!" Closed in 1974 amid overcrowding and scandals. It sat abandoned until ghost hunts in the 1990s revived it as a paranormal hotspot. The poor farm's debts are paid in screams. Byberry Mental Hospital in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Philadelphia's Byberry opened back in 1903 as the Frankfurt Asylum for the Insane. Sprawled over 900 acres to ease overcrowding, but, it became a real snake pit by the 1930s, 7,000 patients in wards filled with excrement and chains. Treatments? Well, they included straitjackets, insulin comas, and these, experimental shocks. The creepy chronicles tell of Charlie, the catatonic molester, whose groping ghost still stalks women, mass graves unearthed during demolition, and faceless shadows in old photos, howling like the damned. Even a priest's exorcism, failed to quiet them. A probe in the 1980s into all the filth and violence finally shut it down in 1990. It was raised by 2006 for homes, but neighbors still report cries piercing the night. Byberry's sins, well, they linger in suburbia. Willowbrook State School, Staten Island, New York. Opened in 1947 as a school for just 300 disabled kids, Willowbrook ballooned to 6,000 by the 1970s, a hell of hepatitis experiments on orphans' kids smeared in their own waste, beaten and, honestly, forgotten. Rivera's 1972 TV raid exposed the warehouse of The Walking Dead, Phantom Plea's tiny hands pounding the walls, a girl's apparition, hepatitis-scarred, whispering mommy, and full-bodied apparitions fleeing from the ghosts of orderlies. The cries, they're unmistakable. Lawsuits and deinstitutionalization shut it down in 1987. Now it's the College of Staten Island, but, the land remembers. Eloise Asylum, Westland, Michigan. Michigan's Eloise started as an 1832 poorhouse exploding into a 78-building colossus by 1913 for 10,000 mental patients, TB sufferers, indigents in hydrotherapy horrors and mass graves. Jars of organs lined basements, souvenirs of the dead, spectral secrets like the hitchhiker, a vanishing woman in white, children's ghosts in the asylum wing, and jars rattling with unseen hands. One EVP chillingly whispered, "Bury me." Closed in 1982 from funding cuts and abuse probes. Partially raised, the Kirkbride stands haunted. Story 9. The Whisperer of Waverly Hills. Date, February 17, 1953. Location, Waverly Hills Sanatorium, Louisville, Kentucky. I was a night nurse at Waverly Hills Sanatorium in the winter of 1953, working the tuberculosis wards where the air always smelled of antiseptic and, honestly, death. The place was a maze of suffering, patients coughing up blood, their eyes hollow from the white death. But one patient, known only as patient 47, chilled me more than the disease ever could. His file was sparse. No name, no family. Just male, approximately 30, admitted January 1953, advanced pulmonary TB. He'd been found wandering the Louisville outskirts, barefoot in the snow, muttering words no one could catch. I first met him on February 17, 1953, during my midnight rounds. The ward was quiet except for the usual moans and the hum of the UV lamps we used to burn the TB out of lungs. Patient 47 sat upright in his cot, his gaunt frame silhouetted against the window, staring at the moon like it was whispering back. His eyes were wrong, too wide, too bright, like they held a light of their own. I checked his chart, but he grabbed my wrist, his grip cold as iron. "They're in the walls," he whispered, his voice like gravel scraping bone. I yanked free, heart pounding, and told him to rest, but his words stuck with me. Every night after, I'd hear him whispering, not to me, not to anyone, just to the air. Words like beneath, watching, coming. The other patients avoided him, saying he'd sit by their beds at night staring, never blinking. One old man swore 47's shadow moved when he didn't, stretching across the wall like a spider. I laughed it off. TB fever makes people see things, but then, well, I saw it too. During a storm, lightning lit the ward and his shadow split into two, one human, one hulking with arms too long. I blinked and it was gone. The creepiest night came when I found him in the body chute tunnel. Nobody went down there unless they were carting corpses to the train. 600 a year hidden from the living to keep morale up. I was checking inventory when I heard whispers echoing from the chute. I followed, flashlight shaking, and found 47 standing in the dark, 500 feet down, his hospital gown soaked in something black. He was carving symbols into the concrete with a shard of glass, swirls and eyes that made my head swim. "They're waking," he said, not looking at me. I screamed for him to get back to the ward, but he just smiled, his teeth stained red. I ran, locking the chute behind me. The next morning he was back in his cot, like nothing happened, but his chart noted a fever spike, and by noon, he was gone. Dead, they said, from TB. They wheeled him to the chute, but when they opened it, the symbols were gone. The walls clean. I quit the next week. Years later, I found a forum post from a 1960s orderly claiming a patient's ghost whispered in the chute, drawing those same symbols. Ghost hunters now catch EVPs down there. They're waking. I still dream of those eyes glowing in the dark and wonder what he saw in the walls. I was a janitor at Penhurst State School in 1962, mopping floors in a place that felt more like a prison than a hospital. The air was thick with the stench of unwashed bodies and despair. 6,000 patients crammed into wards meant for 600, kids chained to cribs, adults screaming in straitjackets. But the strangest soul I ever met was a boy we called Silent Tommy. His file said admitted 1958, age 15, severe intellectual disability, nonverbal. No family ever visited, and the staff whispered he'd been left at the gates in a burlap sack like trash. On April 9, 1962, I was cleaning the D ward basement, a dungeon of leaking pipes and flickering bulbs, when I first saw him. Tommy sat in a corner, knees to his chest, staring at a blank wall. His eyes were gray, almost cloudy, like he was blind, but he'd turn his head if you moved, like he saw through you. I said, "Hey kid, you shouldn't be down here," but he didn't flinch. Then I heard it, a low hum, like a swarm of bees coming from his throat. Not a word, just a vibration that made my teeth ache. I grabbed his arm to lead him upstairs, but his skin was ice cold, and he didn't budge, heavy as stone. After that, Tommy started appearing where he shouldn't. I'd find him in locked rooms, staring at walls, always humming that awful sound. Once I caught him in the boiler room, tracing his finger in the air like he was writing. The pipes groaned louder, and the lights flickered in rhythm with his hum. The other patients feared him. Kids would scream if he got near, saying he stole their thoughts. A nurse swore she saw him walk through a locked door, his body fading like smoke. The worst came during a midnight shift. I was mopping the isolation ward when the humming started, louder than ever, shaking the walls. I followed it to Tommy's room, but he wasn't in his bed. Instead, he stood on the ceiling, upside down, staring at me with those cloudy eyes. His hum turned to a whisper. "They're under us," I screamed, dropping my mop, and ran. The lights went out and I heard footsteps, not his but heavier, from below the floor. I told the head nurse, but she called me drunk. The next day, Tommy was gone. No record of discharge, death, or escape. His file was blank, like he'd never existed. Years later, a 1970s Penhurst expose mentioned a boy who vanished after staff reported him communing with spirits. Ghost hunters now say D ward's basement hums at night, and EVPs whisper, "Under us." I never went back, but I still feel those eyes watching me, waiting for whatever's below to wake.
The Unsettling Mystery of Missing Hikers and Campers, revised. The Call of the Wild is both enchanting
From
and
lobotomy
perilous,
blades to
drawing
unmarked graves,
adventurers into
these
a
asylums
vast,
weren't just closed,
untamed
they were
embrace of
condemned by the
promises of
screams they
serenity
silenced.
and
As we
self-discovery.
close this vault of
Yet
nightmares,
beneath its
remember,
beauty
progress
lies an
buried them,
unpredictable
but the past
force
doesn't stay
daring a
buried.
peaceful hike
Have you
or
braved one?
camping trip
Share your
into a
chills below,
nightmare.
like, subscribe, and
In the
hit the bell.
1980s, as
Next time,
outdoor
we unearth
recreation
America's
surged,
cursed roads.
a
Sleep
series
tight,
of
if you
chilling
can.
disappearances